Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen, and with us for our program today, Assemblyman Bob Oaks. Bob Oaks represents the 130th Assembly District. That's an Assembly District that includes the counties of Wayne, Cayuga, and Oswego. And we want to thank you folks for joining us. Bob Oaks, it's nice to see you.
Nice to be here, Mike.
I still don't know how you make it here to any of these tapings of this program in the month of March. From one meeting to you had your joint budget legislative hearings that were going on. Now there are conference committees meeting. All this budget negotiations, all slamming together here in the middle of the month of March. You got to be a pretty busy guy.
This is the time of year that all of that does come together. A lot more time spent in the Capitol. The weeks get longer. The deliberations get longer. A lot of the things happening right now, very honestly, are at staff level. People talking about individual pieces of the budget. You go around the first and second floors and the third floor of the Capitol. A lot of lights are on later in the evening right now. So it is a busy time at the Capitol for me and for a lot of others.
Now, the way this takes shape here at the Capitol is the governor, and I think most of you folks realize the governor puts forth his budget proposal at the beginning of the session back in January. Now it's time for the Assembly and the Senate to each react to that and put out their own budget proposals. We saw that happen in the Assembly just a few days ago, and when that it's called a resolution. When that resolution came up to outline the Assembly's ideas on what should be, this is the Assembly majority ideas that we're talking about here, when that came out for discussion, you stood up representing the Assembly minority opinion and had some things to say about that. So why don't we start this off today by looking at your remarks from the day that Assembly budget resolution came to the floor, and then we'll be back to kind of put it in context for you and talk some more about what's going on with budget negotiations here at the state capitol with Bob Oaks.
I've seen some estimates, for instance, that the minimum wage could in the first year, if implemented as proposed, closer to even $1 billion in impact in all the various areas of the healthcare industry across our state. But in addition to that, the minimum wage, from my perspective, in the district that I represent, certainly it's going to have an impact on healthcare, and it's going to have an impact on our school districts and libraries, our YMCAs and other entities. But the private sector, the people who especially make things to compete against somebody else, if we end up with a minimum wage that is so much higher than other areas, we're going to lose the very foundation, the private sector jobs in manufacturing and agriculture, people who have to sell something competitively against another state, against another area. We're going to have a huge impact on this state in a negative way. And certainly the district that I represent, some areas might have an analysis that would suggest that they might have a net gain in jobs, but certainly a lot of the rural upstate New York areas would be drastically affected in a negative way if we implement that proposal as it's been put within this budget.
So you're talking there about the proposal that the Assembly majority believes in, along with the governor, to increase the minimum wage in New York State to $15 an hour. It currently is at $9 an hour. And I know there are people here at the state, some people think it's a fait accompli, that this is just going to happen. But I know there are others, including yourself, who are really doubtful that we need any further increase to the minimum wage, let alone going from $9 to $15 an hour.
Well, clearly the way that you get increases in wages is having a thriving, competitive economy that is doing well, that people who want to hire you have to pay you more because they need workers and because they're making money at what they're doing and they want to hire more people. We've had an economy that's been coming back, but it hasn't come back in a way that's driven wage increases. And you know, when we talk about this, Mike, 20% of the people who are making minimum wage are in poverty. But 80% of the people who make minimum wage are not living in poverty. So the question is, should we raise the minimum wage for everyone in the state, including a 16-year-old who's working at the local hardware store, and somebody who's just making extra money for spending or at a summer job, perhaps? Or do we target the people who are hurting because they aren't able to lift themselves out of poverty? And so we have a tool that's already in place, the Earned Income Tax Credit, for the federal government and the state government, which says if you're making a lower wage and you're living in poverty, we will give you, in essence, a refund on your taxes and maybe even more than that to help lift you up. And rather than just putting it across the economy and, in fact, do away with a lot of those summer jobs and those after-school jobs and others who are working just to supplement their money a little bit, we can target the people who really need it and meet their needs to hopefully help lift them without devastating, which we feel, in many ways, we will see thousands of jobs across upstate New York disappear because we're going alone in New York if we do this. The Pennsylvanias and the Ohios and some of our other neighboring states who have lower minimum wages, businesses are going to look, if they can make a certain product anywhere or supply a certain business anywhere, wouldn't you do it in a place where you can start workers, take a chance on workers for less money, as opposed to New York where you would have to start someone out, no experience, making $15 right away, and that's a big cost to the employer to be able to do that.
I was in Vermont just last summer, went through a McDonald's drive-thru, and there was a sign in the window that was advertising in the biggest print, $10 an hour. Come work for us, $10 an hour. That was a selling point, and that would just be so uneven if New York State went with the $15 an hour. It just doesn't. It seems like it wouldn't make sense.
And that is one of the proposals that the governor has put in this budget. It's one of the things that obviously people are hearing about as they open their newspapers or turn on the radio, maybe turn on the evening news. There's other proposals. We didn't, in that clip, talk or tape all of my responses to the budget. One of the major concerns, the governor has put in a self-imposed 2% cap throughout his administration, throughout the time he's been in office. New York, before that, it had increases of 4%, 7%, 11%, and under Spitzer and before. And we ended up seeing in 2008, 2009, the economy take a big dip. We had huge budget gaps. The governor came in and said, let's hold the spending down to 2%. With doing that, actually the first year a lot of cuts, then in years after that holding it to 2%, our revenues have been able to catch up with the spending because we've had the spending go at a moderated level. In this proposal, the Assembly this year proposes to increase spending by 3.8%. And that comes right on the heels of listening to economists tell us we're slowing down. We aren't going to be adding a lot more jobs to the economy overall. Don't plan on getting a lot of increases in the personal income tax. That 3.7% spending would depend on that to a great extent. And so I have a major concern that the Assembly majority in their budget proposal would put extreme pressure on the future budgets in New York State, crises that we might have to face as we go forward. And so I really believe the governor, the Senate, and the Assembly, as they get down to make those final decisions, we have to keep the overall spending held at the 2% level.
You're not thinking that there are elected officials who want to overspend, especially in what amounts to an election year?
Gee, go figure.
I know, right? But isn't there in this budget, this year's budget, expected to be some putting back of state funds towards education? Is that part of what we're talking about?
There is, and the effort. Certainly, the governor had a more modest approach to restoring some of the funds that were taken away back when the state had some difficult fiscal years. The Assembly, however, would add significant dollars that would help put us in a very tough financial position, I think, in the future. So where we go, I think we can add to what the governor did, but it can't be to the excessive levels that the Assembly majority is proposing.
It ought to just be another couple weeks, and we'll know how this is all going to play out, what the final numbers are going to be. A budget is due to be in place by the end of the month of March.
Absolutely.
And you're expecting that's going to happen.
New York State has had, I think, 5 now or 6 consecutive budgets on time, and I think we'll have another one this year as well.
All right. Now, just our remaining few minutes, a little bit of discussion on changing the culture here at the state capitol. We remember at the end of 2015 the convictions of some legislative leaders on using their positions to enhance their own personal gain. There's some question about differences of opinion, I think, among people here at the Capitol about how best to change the culture and maybe clean the place up a little bit.
Well, I think part of that problem we've seen is people amassing too much power. We have a strong leader system. We saw the Speaker of the Assembly serve there for 22 years, and after having all that time in office, he ended up misusing that. So one of the things that I would see is that we need to put some limits on the time that someone can be the Speaker of the Assembly. So at least do some term limits within the system, how long people can be committee chairs, so that all the healthcare industry doesn't have to go to one person to get their legislation through, or the Speaker aren't able to put themselves in a position where they can make deals that financially benefit themselves. So we just had a number of rules changes that have been put out by the Assembly majority, and I think some of those are good, opening up so you can find out things on a website quicker, making the committee structure a little more open, but it basically ignores a lot of the things that I think, from my standpoint, if the Speaker of the Assembly can take away your allotment for your staff or cut it way down because you don't go along, that's something that I think is a powerful thing over someone.
Or kill your legislation, your bills that you've proposed on behalf of the people you represent. That happens too.
It does, but if we had everybody getting the same allotment, irrespective of minority or majority, we all serve about the same number of people, whether we're in North Rose or Northampton. The districts across the state do that. And so I don't feel these changes that the Assembly put out are significant enough. I think the leader did a great job. He said, they're rebuilding a website, but they aren't going far enough to rebuild the trust that we need to put back into this legislature. So that's where we ought to be going stronger.
So there are definite differences of opinion, more work to do.
Absolutely.
Bob Oaks, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks, too, for spending your time, and we'll hope to see you soon for our next edition of Assembly Calendar.